Imagine this for a second. You've just spent more than 20 hours in labor, finally holding your newborn daughter for the first time. And the man who promised to love you forever looks at you like you've committed a crime. Not because you hurt anyone, but because you gave him a girl instead of the boy he demanded. That is the moment Ava Sullivan's life fell apart. What she couldn't know on that cold hospital bed was that something far more beautiful was quietly beginning. Ava was 27, a kindergarten teacher with warm brown eyes that frightened children trusted within seconds of meeting her. There was something genuinely soft about her, the kind you only find in someone who actually likes people. She spent her adult life calming crying kids and buying school supplies out of her own paycheck. Her heart was the biggest asset she owned, and that is exactly what made her such an easy target. Her parents were gone, and marriage had quietly stripped away the modest life she once knew. When Daniel Sullivan proposed, he didn't just promise love. He promised a version of safety that sounded like a fairy tale. Daniel was 32, tall, sandy-haired, charming in that polished, smile-first way of the rich. But in private, with the door closed, he operated on exactly one currency: results. He had told everyone his first child would be a son, an heir. Ava tried to remind him that doctors had never confirmed the gender. It didn't matter. Daniel treated certainty like a command the universe had to obey. So there she was, in a brutal New York winter, holding this tiny, perfect little girl with flushed cheeks and wisps of dark hair. She kissed the baby's forehead, and a love hit her so hard it scared her. For the first time in months, she believed everything might still be okay. And then Daniel spoke. "She's healthy," Ava whispered, holding the baby up so he could see. "Daniel, look, she has your chin." He didn't move closer. He walked to the window, and when he finally spoke, his voice was flat and empty. "I can't do this." At first, Ava thought he meant the sleepless nights. Then he turned around, and there was no fear in his eyes at all. There was calculation. He wanted a son. Everybody knew that. This marriage is over. He placed a folder on the bedside table. Divorce papers prepared before Ava had even given birth. The apartment belonged to his family's holding company. The accounts she'd used for years were in his name, as lawyers had already begun restricting access. He explained it all like a man walking a slow student through a contract. Ava sat there, newborn in her arms, the truth sorting itself out in her chest. He had planned this, months of planning, deciding her fate before his daughter ever took a single breath. "You planned this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I planned for every outcome," he said, careful not to look at the baby. 3 days later, Ava walked out of that hospital carrying her daughter, a worn brown suitcase, and nothing else in the world. A kind nurse named Margaret had packed formula, diapers, and warm blankets into her bag. Ava called 3 former friends. 2 didn't answer. The third said her landlord didn't allow guests. And that is when the truth settled around her like the cold itself. She was completely alone in one of the coldest cities on earth, with a baby who depended on her for everything. The snow hit her like a wall the second she stepped outside. She only made it as far as a stone bench near the hospital entrance before her knees gave way. She sat down carefully and tucked her daughter beneath her old wool coat, far too thin and too small for them both, opening around the child and letting the wind take her own body instead. Every few seconds, she pressed a bare finger to the baby's cheek to make sure she was still warm. A shelter? She didn't know which would take a newborn at night. A hotel? Her card had been declined. But she refused to cry, afraid her shaking would disturb the child. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the baby's dark hair. "I should have protected you better." And that is when a pair of black shoes stopped in front of her in the snow. Ava looked up and her whole body tensed, because almost everyone in New York knew the face of Nicholas Morrow, the most feared name in the city. 39, well over 6 feet, pale blue eyes that gave away nothing. Mafia boss, the rumors said. A legacy of violence, money, and silence. He stood in a white shirt beneath a tailored black coat, collar open, no tie. But here is the thing the headlines never captured. He wasn't outside that hospital by accident. He had just spent the evening visiting a dock worker injured in a warehouse accident. Because if you accept a man's labor, you accept responsibility when he gets hurt. Two security men waited by a black sedan, but Nicholas didn't get in the car. His attention settled on the woman sitting alone in the falling snow, the hospital bracelet around her wrist, the suitcase at her feet, the way she shielded the baby. Every movement aimed at keeping the child warm even as her own lips lost their color. Something shifted inside him. He had spent years pushing his family's criminal operation toward legitimate business. Women admired his wealth or feared his name, but none had ever wanted a life beside the danger. So work had become his only companion. And then this freezing, broken woman protected her child before she protected herself. And it reached a part of him ambition had never once touched. Nicholas crossed the pavement and stopped in front of the bench. Without a word, he took off his black coat and placed it around her shoulders and the baby. The fabric still held his body heat, and Ava gathered it closer before she could stop herself. "Do you have somewhere to go?" His voice was deep, but unexpectedly gentle. Ava tried to answer with dignity. The truth broke through instead. "No," she admitted, "not anymore. If you are not afraid of my reputation," he said quietly, "let me help you." Every instinct in any sane person would have said run. But Nicholas hadn't touched her without permission or demanded a single thing. He simply stood there in the snow, as though her answer actually mattered. Ava looked at her daughter, then at the darkening street, and she understood something that pride never wants to admit. Pride cannot keep a newborn warm. She gave a small, exhausted nod. Nicholas picked up her suitcase himself, walked slowly beside her, and waited until she and the baby were safely inside the car. Minutes later, the sedan carried them through the snow toward the Morrow mansion, toward a man who had long ago given up on family, unaware he was bringing home the two people who would change every room of his life. And if you think this story is just about a rescue, you are wrong. Stay with me, because what happened inside those walls is where the real magic lives. The Morrow mansion, all gray stone and bare winter trees, sat behind iron gates on the northern edge of Manhattan. It looked intimidating. But the moment Ava walked through the entrance hall with a newborn against her chest, she realized it wasn't threatening at all. It was empty. Marble floors the size of skating rinks, crystal chandeliers, everything perfect, everything expensive, nothing alive. He didn't park her in some grand guest suite, but in a quiet eastern wing overlooking a private courtyard, with a bedroom, a sitting room, a nursery, and a small kitchen for warming milk in the night. Here's the detail that tells you everything about this man. He had already ordered a crib, diapers, blankets, medicine, and infant clothing before the car reached the estate, planning for a stranger's baby like she was family. Ava stood in the doorway in his black coat, afraid the rooms might vanish if she breathed too deeply. When she tried to ask what he expected in return, his expression hardened, not from anger but discomfort. "Nothing," he said. "You just left the hospital. Your only responsibility is to recover and take care of your daughter." Then he summoned the staff and laid down the law. "No one asks about her marriage, her family, or why she is here," Nicholas said. "No one reports her movements to anyone outside this house. She and the child are guests under my protection." His voice never rose, but everyone understood his calm carried more weight than any shouting could. When the housekeeper, Eleanor, a tall woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair, quietly asked what Ava might need, Nicholas glanced toward the closed bedroom door, where the baby had just begun to cry. "Peace," he answered. "Start with that." Over the next few days, Ava barely left that wing, living in fragments, feed the baby, change her, sleep an hour, wake in a panic. Eleanor visited every morning with clean linens, never asking an intrusive question. Her reserved manner softened around the newborn, though she hid it by straightening already straight blankets. Ava eventually learned why. Eleanor had lost her only daughter to illness years earlier and expressed love through order because every other door had been closed to her. The chef, Marco, sent elaborate meals, truffle risotto, roasted duck, delicate pastries. But Ava could barely manage a few bites. One afternoon she asked, almost apologetically, for chicken soup and plain bread instead. The next day Marco appeared with a bowl, offended, until Ava praised the broth and asked how he made it. They talked for 20 minutes, her first laugh since the hospital. As her strength returned, Ava started moving to the mansion, and being a naturally observant person, she noticed things. The kitchen staff worked overlapping shifts that left some exhausted and others idle. Breakfast was cooked for people who never ate it, while the night guard survived on vending machine coffee. The mansion served elaborate dinners every evening, though Nicholas usually came home too late to touch them. Ava didn't arrive with a plan to reorganize anybody's life. She just asked questions, listened to complaints nobody thought important, and made small suggestions like staggering the cook schedules and keeping coffee ready for security team at midnight. The little changes worked, and arguments that had simmered for years quietly stopped. And this is the thing that made Ava different. She never gave orders like the mansion belonged to her. She thanked people by name and remembered the small details everyone else ignored, like the maid studying for a nursing certificate, whose schedule she rearranged so the young woman could attend evening classes. Soon the kitchen was producing roast chicken with herbs, warm bread, and vegetable stew, and the hallways smelled like a home for the first time in years. When the guards learned Ava had made their coffee herself, their politeness melted into loyalty. But the baby changed that mansion more than any decoration could. Her cries traveled corridors that had only known footsteps. Her first laugh became a sound every staff member recognized. Marco carried spoons that made gentle chiming noises, because the baby followed the sound with wide eyes. And here is the heartbreaking part. Ava stayed careful the whole time, her belongings still inside that suitcase. Every night she reminded herself she was a guest, that gratitude didn't give her the right to imagine a future in this house. And every morning, another person greeted her like her presence had become part of the mansion's rhythm. Nicholas noticed the transformation gradually. First the smell of fresh bread in his office during an afternoon meeting. Then the sound of staff speaking freely instead of going silent when he approached. But the dining room was the real shock. For years he had eaten alone at the head of a long table. Now Ava sometimes sat one end with the baby beside her, while Eleanor reviewed household notes and Marco argued about whether the soup needed more salt. Nicholas started joining them for 10 minutes, then 30, listening as Ava described the baby's first smile. The room stopped being a formal chamber. It became imperfect, noisy, and alive. His work habits changed without announcement. He used to stay at headquarters until midnight, because why rush home to an empty building? Now he ended meetings on time. Every evening he found Ava in the sitting room with the baby against her shoulder, watching from a respectful distance at first, terrified of holding something so small. Ava showed him where to put his hand under the baby's head and how to support her back. The first time that tiny hand closed around his thumb, Nicholas froze completely, like movement might break something sacred. Those few minutes before bedtime became the most fiercely protected of his day. He let meetings wait, while Ava finished feeding her. Nicholas had spent years telling himself he needed the right woman or the right moment before he could have a family. Watching Ava settle the baby against his chest one quiet evening, he finally understood the truth. Perfection was never what he wanted. What he wanted was far simpler and far harder to find. A home that knew he was coming back, and people whose presence made returning matter. 2 months passed, and winter surrendered to spring. The once silent estate woke each morning to the gentle sounds of a baby discovering the world one smile at a time. Ava no longer counted the days until she should leave. Nicholas never missed breakfast with the baby, and always came home early enough to carry her through the gardens before sunset. The staff had quietly stopped calling the eastern wing the guest residence. Without anyone announcing it, they had started calling it the family wing. Ava noticed and said nothing, afraid that acknowledging her own happiness might invite fate to take it away. And then, late one quiet morning, 3 black sedans pulled up outside the gate. No investors, no politicians, no business partners. Just visitors carrying polished leather briefcases and the expressions you develop after decades of delivering life-changing news. Their leader was Charles Bennett, a distinguished attorney with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, who explained that their visit concerned Ava personally and could not be delayed. Ava walked into the conference room carrying her daughter, nervous, apologizing for bringing the baby. But Charles smiled and assured her she would not be an interruption. Then he took an aged leather portfolio from his briefcase and laid a sealed envelope on the walnut table. The wax seal bore an unfamiliar family crest. Charles looked directly at Ava. "Miss Sullivan," he said quietly, "we are here because of the final wishes of Arthur Whitmore, The name froze Ava in place. She had not heard it spoken aloud in years. Let me pause here, because you need to understand who Arthur Whitmore was, and why this moment matters. Arthur had lived almost entirely outside the spotlight while quietly controlling one of the most respected education empires in the country, never marrying or having children, appearing in public only for schools and scholarships. 40 years earlier, he had founded Whitmore Education Group, turning a single private academy into a nationwide network of schools and training institutes. And here's the key to his character. Wealth was never his real ambition. Arthur believed education changed generations, not just individuals, and he kept his personal life isolated, afraid fame would distract from the institutions he spent his life building. Now, here's what Ava remembered. Arthur was her mother's older cousin, known to her only through childhood holidays and the occasional handwritten birthday card. When her parents died, she assumed he preferred to stay distant. She carried the name around like an old photograph, something from a chapter of her life that had closed. But Charles gently corrected that assumption, revealing that unbeknownst to almost everyone, Arthur had quietly followed her life for years through trusted family contacts. He knew she had become a kindergarten teacher instead of chasing a lucrative career, bought books and supplies with her own salary when funding fell short, and earned letters from parents praising her patience with children others had given up on. Arthur believed those choices revealed more about a person than financial success ever could. In his private journal, he had written something that still makes me emotional to this day. Among every surviving member of the Whitmore family, only Ava truly understood why education existed. She didn't see schools as businesses, but as places where frightened children could become confident adults. Charles carefully unfolded another document. 3 years ago, he explained, Mr. Whitmore executed his final will under the supervision of our firm. He paused and read the paragraph Arthur had written himself. If I leave this world without a wife or children of my own, every share, every property, and every responsibility I possess shall pass entirely to Ava Sullivan. Wealth without compassion eventually destroys itself. She possesses a compassion I spent my entire life searching for. The room fell silent, and then Charles opened the rest of the folders, because there was more, so much more. 78% of Whitmore Education Group, commercial buildings in Manhattan, residential properties in Boston, investment portfolios, charitable foundations. Independent valuation placed the inheritance at more than $260 million. Ava stared blankly at the papers, not because of the number, but because she couldn't understand why someone she barely remembered had trusted her with an entire lifetime of work. There she was, sitting in shock with a newborn on her lap, having arrived with nothing but a suitcase and the clothes on her back. Now the story takes its sharpest turn, and you already know who is going to show up. News spread faster than anyone predicted, and within days the articles reached Daniel Sullivan, the same man who had abandoned Ava beside a hospital entrance, suddenly remembered she existed. 3 mornings later, through his attorneys, he claimed the divorce had never been completed and demanded rights over the inherited estate, hinting that refusal would trigger years of litigation. This is the moment where your blood should boil. The man threw his wife and newborn out into the street for giving birth to a daughter. He prepared divorce papers before the baby even arrived. He left her with nothing but a worn suitcase. And the second she inherits $260 million, he shows up like a vulture with a briefcase, claiming he's owed something. It is so shameless, it almost loops back around to being impressive. That evening, after the baby was asleep, Ava asked Nicholas if they could speak privately, and in a voice so quiet it hurt, she revealed something she had never told another person. Arthur had never trusted Daniel. From the very beginning, after meeting him only twice, Arthur privately confessed that Daniel's interest in Ava seemed strangely connected to her distant family ties, rather than genuine affection. He said nothing publicly, lacking proof, but quietly hired an independent firm of former federal financial investigators to watch Daniel's business for years, before his death instructing his law firm to seal every report until the estate had legally transferred to Ava. Charles had delivered those sealed files that morning, but Ava had been too overwhelmed to read them. Until now, Nicholas opened the thick investigation file, while Ava watched him from across the table, and what was inside was worse than either of them imagined. Hundreds of pages documenting shell corporations, fraudulent accounting records diverting company funds into offshore accounts, forged executive signatures, fabricated consulting agreements, years of financial manipulation concealed beneath legitimate businesses. Forensic accountants reconstructed entire money trails, showing millions disappearing through companies Daniel secretly controlled. Every allegation backed by bank records and sworn testimony collected long before Arthur's death. Ava felt physically ill. The man she had once trusted hadn't merely been selfish. He had spent years building an elaborate deception while pretending to be a hard-working businessman. She started to apologize for dragging such problems into his home, but Nicholas cut her off before the guilt could swallow her whole. He finished the last page without raising his voice. Those who barely knew him mistook his calm for indifference, but the people closest to him understood that the quieter he became, the more carefully he planned. He closed the folder and reached for the secure telephone on his desk. Within the hour, Morrow Group's legal counsel, forensic auditors, and compliance specialists received encrypted copies of every file Arthur had preserved. Nicholas gave exactly one instruction. Everything proceeds through the law. Every document is verified. Every allegation is examined independently. No shortcuts, no intimidation. No one acts outside legal procedure. That instruction tells you everything. He could have crushed Daniel 100 dark ways, but chose the slow, boring, bulletproof path of the law, because he understood something that petty men like Daniel never do. Justice built on intimidation collapses the second the intimidator leaves the room. Justice built on truth holds forever. For the first time since Daniel had abandoned her, justice no longer depended on fear or power. It depended on the truth. Now, because Daniel did not go away quietly. In fact, he went on the attack, and his first strike didn't come through a courtroom at all. It came through the ugliest weapon in America's arsenal, public opinion. Daniel hired a public relations consultant who never raised her voice, but knew exactly which words create suspicion without exposing a client to a lawsuit. Under her direction, Daniel's story shifted into something almost heroic. He was a betrayed husband, fighting to protect his family legacy. And Ava, the woman abandoned on a hospital bench with a newborn, became the villain, a schemer who traded one wealthy man for another, a manipulator who wheedled her way into a vulnerable billionaire's will and wrapped herself in a mafia boss's protection to cash in. Within days, gossip websites published photographs of Ava entering and leaving the Morrow mansion, captioned to imply she had attached herself to Nicholas before Arthur's death ever became public. None of the stories mentioned that Arthur's will have been signed 3 years earlier. Facts didn't matter. The pictures were what mattered, and they told the story Daniel wanted told. The campaign struck Ava harder than she expected. She knew the accusations were false, but seeing strangers discuss her daughter and the worst days of her life left her ashamed in a way truth alone could not repair. One morning, a photographer tried to capture the baby through the rear window of Ava's vehicle, and security had to slam the gates closed before she could leave for a medical appointment. She told Nicholas she should probably leave, so the scandal wouldn't damage his business. He listened without interrupting, his pale blue eyes fixed on her face. When she finished, he answered in the same calm tone he used during board negotiations. "You did not create this problem," he said. "Leaving would only teach Daniel that pressure works." And that, right there, is the difference between a protector and a possessor. Nicholas never once tried to own Ava's story or make her decisions for her. He just refused to let someone else's cruelty dictate her life. But the courtroom is where Daniel planned to bleed her dry. His attorneys filed one motion after another. Freeze the inheritance. Question Arthur's mental capacity. Challenge the witnesses to the will. Claim Ava had hidden assets. Every filing delayed the transfer of voting control and planted doubt among the directors. Here's the strategy, and it's a nasty one. Daniel didn't need to win. He needed the fight to be so expensive, so exhausting, so frightening, that Ava would eventually sign a settlement just to make it stop. He wasn't fighting for justice. He was fighting to make her tired. Nicholas recognized the play instantly and refused the bait. He would not contact Daniel personally and forbade anyone connected to Morrow Group from threatening him. "He wants us to become the story," Nicholas told his legal team. "We will give the court documents, not drama." The response was led by Rebecca Hale, Morrow Group's chief counsel, a 48-year-old attorney with a steady, unsmiling manner that made careless executives rethink every word. She worked alongside a team of independent forensic accountants led by Thomas Keene, who trusted numbers more than people and insisted every record be verified from its original source. An investigation unfolded layer by layer, the way every good fraud story does. A consulting company in Delaware led to a property corporation in Nevada, then to accounts held through Caribbean intermediaries. Thomas's team found forged authorization forms, internal emails disguising expenses as fees for projects that never existed, and bank records split into small amounts so nobody would look too closely. He hadn't built a few dishonest arrangements in moments of desperation. He had constructed an entire hidden financial system, deliberately, patiently, over years. Ava showed up to every preparation session, even when Nicholas offered to let the attorneys handle everything without her. She remembered forms Daniel had asked her to sign without explanation, and each memory stung. But Rebecca refused to let her spiral. Fraud depends on trust, the attorney told her. Being deceived does not make you foolish. It makes him responsible. Nicholas stayed nearby through those meetings, but never answered for Ava when she got overwhelmed. He quietly set a glass of water beside her or asked the attorneys to pause, and never touched her unless she reached for him first. It is the quietest form of love there is, and she was starting to understand what it meant. The final hearing took place in a crowded Manhattan courtroom, almost 4 months after Daniel's first claim. Judge Miriam Cole presided, known for taking complicated arguments apart with surgical questions. Daniel walked in wearing that unshakable confidence, but you could watch it drain out of him as the morning went on. Charles established that Arthur had been mentally sound when he signed the will. Rebecca walked the court through Daniel's financial network piece by piece. Thomas translated the money flow into plain language. Each chart narrowed the gap between suspicion and proof. Daniel's attorneys objected until they were hoarse, but every document had been authenticated through banks, registries, and handwriting experts. One witness testified that Daniel had instructed him to backdate invoices. Another confirmed signatures had been copied from old documents. By the end of the hearing, the inheritance dispute had almost become a side note because the evidence of broader financial crime sat right there on the record. Judge Cole rejected every claim Daniel had made. The will was valid, enforceable, and free from improper influence. She also ordered the relevant financial records handed to federal and state authorities for further investigation. Before Daniel could even leave the courthouse, investigators served him with formal notices connected to fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and unlawful financial transactions. The cameras outside caught the exact moment that polished expression finally collapsed. Ava stayed seated as the courtroom emptied. Charles quietly confirmed what she still couldn't quite believe. The legal obstacles were gone. Full control of everything Arthur had intended for her would transfer without Daniel's involvement. Ava closed her eyes, not in celebration, but in relief so deep it made her dizzy. Nicholas stood beside her, offering no grand speeches and claiming no credit. He had never asked what place he might have in her future or use the protection as leverage, simply waiting until she was ready to stand and walking beside her to the courthouse doors, between Ava and the cameras while security cleared a path. His hand hovered near her back, offering support without deciding her steps. Ava finally understood what his protection had always been, not possession. He had defended her dignity against the scandal, her rights against the lawsuits, and her freedom by refusing to demand anything in return. 1 year later, spring returned to New York, and the Morrow estate had transformed completely. Windows stood open. Children's books sat on side tables. Small toys appeared under chairs no matter how carefully the staff put them away. And Ava Sullivan walked into the headquarters of Whitmore Education Group as its chairwoman. Some board members had quietly expected the former kindergarten teacher to drown in an organization spanning the country. Instead, she spent her first months visiting classrooms, talking with teachers, asking parents what their kids were missing, and killing any proposal that boosted profits by cutting classroom support. Whenever executives celebrated enrollment numbers, Ava reminded them that a successful school isn't measured by how many children walk in. It's measured by whether a frightened child feels safe enough to learn. Together with Nicholas, She built the Whitmore Family Foundation, housing programs for women escaping dangerous marriages, child care grants for mothers returning to work, scholarships for kids whose families couldn't afford supplies, and small schools in low-income neighborhoods. She personally reviewed every building design, demanding warm reading rooms and kitchens that could serve free meals, while Nicholas handled contractors, using the power that once made grown men afraid of his name to make sure nobody inflated a price on a building meant for children. Lily had grown into a bright-eyed 1-year-old with soft brown curls and a terrifying talent for escape, crawling to mansions' halls at astonishing speed and constantly slipping past Eleanor's careful watch to follow the sound of Nicholas's voice. The guards, once clip professionals, now debated which stuffed animal made her laugh hardest. Ava often stood in doorways, watching grown men who had spent their lives protecting a powerful name kneel on the carpet to make faces at a baby. Nicholas's nightly routine had become sacred. No matter how brutal the day, he made it home before Lily's bedtime. He would settle into the nursery chair with a little girl against his chest, and his voice, the same voice that made boardrooms fall silent, went soft and warm when he read stories about forests and distant kingdoms. Some nights she fell asleep with her hand wrapped around his finger, and he sat there long after the story ended, unwilling to disturb her. Her first birthday party happened in the rear garden under strings of warm lights, simple food, a small white cake, open space for kids to run wild. When Lily plunged both hands into the cake, Nicholas laughed out loud, a sound so unfamiliar several employees froze. Later that night, Nicholas asked Ava to walk with him in the garden, and finally spoke. For 39 years, he told her, he had let people believe power protected him from loneliness. None of them understood what it meant to come home to rooms where nobody was waiting. "I used to believe the silence was the price of the life I chose," he said. "I told myself a family could never survive near my name, so I stopped allowing myself to want one." Then he told her the truth. She and Lily had changed that mansion without ever asking permission to belong. His happiness no longer came from winning contracts, but from hearing Lily laugh in the hallway, from knowing that when he opened the front door, somebody noticed he had come back.